What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel and to another news recap. This episode is the calm before the storm, if you will. Teams are allowed to officially start signing free agents on Saturday, October 9th, so we're playing a bit of catch-up as we kind of enter free agency here. The news covered in this video covers everything that has gone down from Saturday, October 2nd, all the way until the uploading of this video on early October 8th. There's a lot to cover, so let's not waste any time here. The plan is to start with the newer stuff, then backtrack our way to some of the other things that happened around Saturday and Sunday. I wanted to begin this episode by discussing the retirement of Birdring. This is obviously huge news, and it comes with question marks about the Gladiators and the opportunity as well to look back and appreciate Birdring's career. To start off, we gotta realize that this definitely does suck if you're the Glads. Birdring was such a reliable player the last couple of years. Other guys like Shu and Kevster have also done some great things, but Birdring has been carrying the team long before they even came. Hitscan is now a serious need, and I'm kind of wondering what their options even are. What do they have in mind? Are they thinking contenders, veterans? This team is usually full of surprises, so I genuinely have no idea what to expect. Regardless of where they go, I hope they have somebody good in mind. They need somebody of Birdring's caliber to compete at a high level, and replicating his production is obviously going to be a very difficult challenge. This is a developing story that we will all have our eyes glued to. But for now, let's focus on Birdring, because it's a tough moment for any longtime Overwatch fan. Birdring is enriched in this game's competitive history, and he's been one of the best for a very long time. His legacy and his story, it's incredible, really. From going to an Apex Finals on Kongdu Panthera, to winning the Grand Finals with London and that Stage 1 title as well, to winning the Countdown Cup this year, it kind of feels like Birdring has found success at every turn. Birdring has genuinely been a crucial aspect of his teams throughout the years, evidently by the fact that pretty much all of them have been in a position to win a championship at some point. When he was dealing with that wrist injury during Season 1, London played way worse. The moment he got back into the full swing of it and he was back to feeling more like himself, they won a championship. And how about the Glads? Do I have to explain what he's meant to that franchise? Birdring has built up one heck of a reputation. I mean, I love this guy's story. I talked about the ups, but he also had to overcome some serious downs. He dealt with the pain of defeat many times. Think back to when he lost to Lunatic High in the Apex era, for example. They were one map away from winning a championship then. Then, he had the wrist injury we were just talking about. After that, things quite possibly reached rock bottom when he struggled to get a grasp on the GOATS meta, and people were calling him washed up, and that includes myself. I kind of thought his time was done. And from what I can remember from reports and everything, Birdring nearly hanged it up back at the end of 2019. So the fact that he came back for another 2 years is impressive. His commitment to pro gaming is quite admirable, and he did so in a pretty triumphant way, I'd like to add. After all the drama involved with London, he craved a fresh start. He needed a place where he wouldn't be defaulted to second most important behind Profit. He needed to lead a team, and that's exactly what he ended up getting when he moved to LA. He was the #1 option, and he made the most of that opportunity. The level of domination he showed reminded me of the good old days back during 2018. The dude reawakened his prime in the final 2 years of his career. Birdring's story and overall career should be celebrated. It was definitely not an easy one compared to some of the other legends out there. Yeah, he had the accolades, he won multiple championships and all of that, and he was a crazy good player in-game, but there were so many downs that he dealt with like a real legend. So with that in mind, thank you so much for everything, Birdring. Thank you for your commitment to this wonderful game. You are going to be missed dearly. Good luck to whatever comes next for you, man. This isn't the only Gladiator news of the video, by the way. There's a lot of older stuff I'm going to be touching upon, but we'll do that later just because it did happen, like, late last week. So for the time being, let's talk about the London Spitfire. Understandably so, they're looking for a fresh start like many other teams out there. The primary core of this roster has been blown up. We're talking almost everybody. Despite being the Tier 2 pride of London, nearly every British Hurricane player was dropped along with Blase. The whole situation feels weird to me. They made it sound like the British Hurricane core was the way of the future at the start of this year. I guess the bad results have them second thinking that. But you know, it's not like any of these guys were god tier that they let go of. The support line in particular, they felt very underwhelming to me. They were probably the most replaceable part of this roster as they weren't super consistent and they didn't make a lot of plays. When it comes to Hottie and Mulf, I guess their synergy wasn't good enough. At this level, it was a bit harder for them to get organized as they oftentimes felt split. Then there's Hybrid, who is probably the least surprising drop out of everybody. He was kind of just a means to an end, you know? London needed some sort of hit scan to fill the void while they waited for Sparker to turn 18, and Hybrid happened to be that guy. And now that he served his purpose, that makes him expendable. Plus, he wasn't all that impactful when he played anyway. Overall, the Spitfire didn't lose anything extremely valuable, but still, it's a little weird that the org is suddenly so willing to move on from them despite their previous history and praise. Oh well though, they freed up space for a better potential roster. Speaking of freeing up space, let's talk about Blase now. I would say he was alright at times last year, but he was far from their best player. He wasn't even a top 2 player at his own position on London. I can't help but feel bad for the guy in a way. In 3 years of trying, Blase has always been a part of these mediocre or below average rosters. He is yet to find a suitable home that gives him any sort of reasonably good supporting cast. But then again, maybe he's not valuable enough to be on any of these middle of the pack to upper tier teams. Either way, there is a great chance this will be the last of Blase at the Overwatch League level. He's had his fair share of shots, and there's a few upcoming Western DPS players out there who probably sound like more attractive options to give a shot. It's a tough reality to face, but that's kind of where we're at right now. But wait, there's more London fans. The final move of the week comes at the coaching department as head coach Fissure leaves your team. When your team wins one game the entire year, some of the blame is absolutely going to fall on the coaching. The original coaching staff that London hired turned out to be a disaster. Moving on from the past altogether is probably in their best interest. They went through 2 head coaches this year, and neither of them really helped the team improve. London fans have to deal with a new team for a 3rd year in a row. It's crazy to think how rough things have been since the end of Season 2. What a rollercoaster ride. Next up is the Boston Uprising. Color Hex, Myungbong, I'm 37, and Stand 1 all enter free agency, while Fusions has decided to retire. Out of all of these drops, the only one that really comes as a surprise is probably Myungbong. He's been a reliable part of this team for the last 2 years, and to make things even better, he remained loyal to this franchise even when things got super ugly back in Season 3. Now for all I know, this could have been a mutual thing, or maybe Myungbong simply wanted to leave the team. Regardless, Boston just lost a high ceiling flex support. Myungbong is now a free man, and you can bet that there's a lot of options on the table. Toronto and a bunch of APAC teams immediately come to mind for me, and that's only scratching the surface. The thing is though, maybe this won't be a huge deal if you're Boston. On paper, it's definitely sad, but the current flex support free agent class looks kind of nice. Twilight, Gangnam Jin, Lastro, they're all right there for the taking. My personal theory though is they have interest in Aztec. Yes, he was a backup all year on Toronto in 2021, but he also happens to be a former WGS player. And if you look at Boston's current team, Punk is the only non-WGS player on the roster. I kinda have this feeling that Coach Laurie wants as many of his young players from contenders as humanly possible. It makes sense from a synergy standpoint. Clearly the Uprising have a lot to think about. Surely they will run with some pretty extensive tryouts to try and figure out what is the best option at this position moving forward. In terms of the other guys, they're all rather replaceable, right? Color Hex and Fusions, they were pretty much never utilized anyway. And while Stand 1 and I'm 37 made for great leaders, they also weren't out of the ordinary players in-game. Boston can definitely do better. I think this is for the best. The Uprising have crazy potential, but they're still missing a few pieces. Some off-season upgrades could work wonders for them. Just thinking about it from a theoretical standpoint, imagine if they were to get a big name free agent or two like Sato, BQB, or Gangnam Jin. They're instantly in business if they pull off some of these moves. Now that this team is starting to be held in a more respectable light, maybe more free agents will feel inclined to give them a chance. Before moving on from the Uprising, it only feels right to take a few moments to appreciate Fusions as he goes into retirement. He was fairly irrelevant this year, but back in the day, he was a hero. Fusion stuck with this team for 3 whole years, and he always gave it his all. He was a great leader, friend, and positive beacon in this community. I can never forget how much passion and positivity he brought to the Boston Uprising back in Season 2. He's a class act and one of the most vocal leaders I have ever seen in this game. From the epic reverse sweeps of Season 2 to that epic 2018 World Cup run, Fusions is forever engraved in some wonderful memories. Thank you for everything, Fusions. Take some time to manage your mental health now because you have more than earned your retirement. Some other interesting news out of Boston is Valentine potentially looking for a new opportunity. As of right now, he's still on the Uprising, but you never know what kind of offer or move might come his way. If I had to take a guess, Valentine will most likely stay. Boston is a good home. He's got his coach and multiple teammates from contenders. He's comfortable there, and I think Boston definitely have interest in keeping him around and potentially building a team around him. Coming back to Boston is the most logical decision for him to make, but maybe he's not happy there. Maybe he wants to go somewhere else. You can't rule out any of the possibilities if he's genuinely considering other opportunities. What's stopping him from signing with some other team looking for a new starting flex DPS? If the offer sounds good, he could totally get shipped off to like New York among other teams out there. It's very difficult to say what might happen for sure, nor is there any guarantee something happens at all, but it's still a storyline to keep an eye on in the future because crazier things have definitely happened. Up next on the Let's Cut Our Whole Team list, or at least most of it, is the NYXL. Surprisingly, they had no interest whatsoever in the youth movement they were building up. Despite some respectable performances out of some of those guys, Yakpung, Kalios, Bianca, Friday, Guangbun, and Feather all said their goodbyes. Friday, I believe he has decided to retire from pro gaming as well as Bianca, so they will not be entering free agency. As for the rest of the lot, I believe they're all seeking new jobs at least right now. I can't help but feel a little surprised that they'd be so willing to walk away from Yakpung and Kalios in particular. They seemed like a pretty decent core to have at the tank position. When thinking about the remaining players, Feather and Guangbun, I think they both showed promise, but were ultimately not well developed enough at the time. The one I'm really disappointed with is Guangbun. I'm kind of sad he did not pan out for the NYXL because I had such high hopes for him heading into his rookie year. But ultimately, he was not versatile or consistent enough. With more time and practice, maybe he'll find another team one day. Overall, the NYXL need more reliable partners for Flora, who they clearly have chosen to build their roster around moving forward. The question is though, do the NYXL pick up fresh talent out of contenders again mostly, or do they plan to sign veterans? Or maybe, just maybe, they're going to make a massive trade. Imagine if they traded for Yaki, let's say. Flora and Yaki, that could be disgusting. That's a lot of carry potential in one lineup. I'm looking forward to seeing what the NYXL do. I get the feeling they're going to go big for some reason. Maybe it's just me, but that's kind of what I'm thinking right now. But perhaps the more interesting news for most of you on the side of the NYXL is JJonak officially leaving the team after 4 years. The final surviving member of the original roster is gone. It makes sense that he'd want to leave since, you know, he probably wants to win and he doesn't feel like the NYXL can offer him that. Plus, everything he's used to on this team and in the city is gone. But even so, it's still incredibly sad news. New York is where this guy built his Hall of Fame caliber legacy. This is where he won League MVP. This is where he became the #1 Zenyatta and flex support in the world for a time. This is where he became a multi-time All-Star and where he won multiple stage championships, and the list keeps going on and on. New York was JJonak's home away from home, essentially. Surely this was a difficult decision for him to make, but ultimately, now was the right time to move on. Like I said, this team is different now. He almost felt like he didn't belong there, like he was out of place in a way. It's a sad day for New York fans, but now is the right time. He's given this org everything he's had and then some. JJonak more than deserves the opportunity to do what he pleases, and I think that most NYXL fans would agree with me there. What JJonak did for this franchise and the league in particular while playing for this team is forever engraved into history. His time on the NYXL might be up, but his legacy will always live on. As the old saying goes, if you truly love something, then you have to be willing to let it go. JJonak is ready for the next chapter in his Overwatch League career, and the NYXL are ready to fully move on from the past and focus on their new upcoming star, aka Flora. It's a mutually beneficial parting. But now the golden question must be asked. Where does JJonak go? It's unreal that he too is throwing his hat into the incredible flex support free agency class we have. The competition with his colleagues and the bidding wars are going to be insane. If you want my 2 cents on what's going to happen, I get the feeling that JJonak will likely join a new APAC team, or at least one that is almost purely Korean over in North America. I could be wrong, but he seems like the type of person who would prefer this type of team environment. With that said, I believe that Hangzhou, Guangzhou, Seoul, Boston, Washington, and maybe Toronto could be great landing spots. I think any one of these rosters would greatly benefit from an aggressive playmaker such as himself. If he wants to win, I would assume he'd prioritize maybe like Seoul depending on what they're doing, or the Justice. Regardless of where JJonak goes, this is a very exciting time to keep a watchful eye on his career, and I don't just mean it because he has a chance to compete for a championship depending on where he goes. Think about it more from a personal standpoint. In the last couple of years, JJonak has kind of been overshadowed by other exciting flex supports. Think about Violet, Twilight, Fielder, and Izayaki, among others. Maybe a new system could give him what he needs to reclaim his throne. It's insane to think that this is reality. There's so much potential on what JJonak could accomplish under a new team. The hype is real, and you best believe it is one of the most exciting off-season storylines to follow. The start of this week also saw some teams from China make decisions. The Hangzhou Spark decided to part ways with Coldest, Mika, Sominsu, and IDK. The Spark have made it clear what direction they plan on heading. It's all about building around guys like Guxue and Shai, aka their Chinese stars. There's a good chance it probably involves Architect and Bernard as well, but you never know what could happen over the next few weeks, or months for that matter. When it comes to the drops, none of them in particular are extreme losses, I would say. They held on to Coldest and Mika for quite some time, but they never really panned out the way Hangzhou was hoping. Coldest pretty much only played because MCD got dropped, and Mika's relevance decreased heavily compared to last year. Surely the Spark could do better. Whether they roll with a Chinese or Korean support line doesn't really matter, because there's a lot of room for that line to improve. Even if they still had MCD, I suspect that they'd probably make at least an upgrade at main support, which gets me into the dropping of IDK. I would argue he was a fan favorite among the Spark. He was a longtime member of this family who always gave it his all. Like Guxue, he's been here since day one. The sad reality, though, is IDK's level of value was never quite the same after his rookie year. A lot of it probably has to do with not being able to play as much Lucio, which is his specialty. Like Joobi, he lacks that complete flexibility you're looking for out of a main support these days. IDK means a lot to the Spark and their fans, but saying goodbye is probably necessary here. It's time to move on and start fresh at the support position. Don't hold on to the past when there's so much potential to grow, you know? Speaking of growth, Sominsu getting the boot opens up a lot of potential for a stronger secondary DPS off the bench. I thought it was really cool that Sominsu got another shot at the league. He showed promise as a member of Vancouver back in the day, so I'm glad the Spark made this happen. But the fact of the matter is that he's pretty unneeded at this point. Sominsu wasn't bad, but he also wasn't great. Early on, he was pretty much just a control specialist, but as Shai continued to get better, he was no longer useful. Plus, you have to figure there's a more intriguing bench option out there with a higher ceiling. Imagine if the Spark were to discover another young star in the making like Shai. They could become really dangerous one day. The Spark made all the right decisions as far as I'm concerned. The IDK departure in particular is really sad, but the Spark are trying to do better. 7-9 is a disappointing record. They want to improve. And hey, maybe somebody else is going to give IDK a chance. According to his Twitter bio, he is LFT. I can't really speak for the other three who got dropped, but IDK at the very least is going to try. Hopefully this isn't the last we see of this guy because he's kind of become a mainstay in this league. Good luck, IDK. Something a bit more minor that also occurred with the Spark is assistant coach U4 getting released. I didn't even realize, but he's been with the Spark for 3 years now. Pretty wild, right? Despite all of the craziness that has happened with the coaching as of late, he's remained here and he's tried his best every step of the way. And I applaud him for that. I feel that most assistants don't remain with the same team for this long. However, this was probably the right move to make. Hangzhou's coaching was a disaster last year. I think a full-on reset is needed to get them back on the right track. It's a new game, so time for some new guidance. If the Spark truly want to improve and put a mediocre season behind them, this is what they have to do. Good on them for making some tough decisions. I think that things could work out very well for them now if they play their cards right. The other Chinese team to make major moves is the Guangzhou Charge, who said their goodbyes to Kariv, Mundu, Maike Lee, and Jihoon. Given Guangzhou's below-average results, these decisions are warranted. From the looks of it, they're mostly holding on to their valuable pieces, aka Choice A1, Eileen, and Krong. The Charge took a giant step backwards compared to their 2020 campaign. Big roster additions were desperately needed. The big thing I've been emphasizing for months now is for Guangzhou to pick up a true hit scan for their DPS rotation. I'd love to see them scoop up like XE or BQB. That would be huge, but DPS was far from the only issue. Support was kind of lackluster as well this year. Mandu and Kariv could have played better for sure. Options such as Jexay, IDK, Twilight, and Gangnam Jin are all worth considering and or pursuing. If you're a Charge fan, don't be overly anxious. Get excited. It's hard to do much worse than what we saw in Season 4, and this free agency class is looking nice. The DPS and Krong make up a nice core. Now all they have to do is get a few more reliable playmakers, and they're back in the thick of it. Stay hopeful, my friends. A turnaround could be around the corner. But what about the 4 guys entering free agency? Could any of them find a new home? If you want my honest answer, probably not. I don't like any of their chances that much. With Mike Lee, I think he needs more time to develop. The mechanics are there, but he's a bit too raw for the league. Thinking about Jihoon and Mandu, their hero pools are the things that could use some improvement. They don't feel like starting caliber players, which makes them not super valuable. The one guy I would argue that has a decent shot is Kariv, but even he might have a hard time looking for a job when considering that guys like Gangnam Jin and Twilight are on the market. It pains me to say it as somebody who looked up to him for a couple of years on the Valiant, but that same magic from years past just hasn't been there recently. That level of dominance and reliability is a bit more inconsistent these days. Why settle for Kariv when you could maybe get Twilight or the next JJonak from contenders, let's say? My biased beacon of hope, though, is that teams recognize Kariv as somebody who has been on mediocre teams as of late. Toronto and Guangzhou didn't really give him a chance to shine. Back when the Valiant were competitive, he was a high-tier player. If a decent team gives him a chance, maybe he could reawaken his old self, but that might just be the hopey I'm talking. It goes both ways, though. Make no mistake. Some people might argue that part of the reason why Toronto and Guangzhou were mediocre was because of Kariv. It really depends on who you're talking to. Either way, I truly hope that Kariv does get another shot. He's one of my all-time favorite players, and he's a Season 1 veteran. It just wouldn't be the same without his presence for me. Let's take a quick break from departures for a moment. How about we get some good news in for once? The first revolves around the Dallas Fuel. After announcing the departure of Pine, Exy, Jexay, and Repel, they proclaimed that every other player from last year's team would be staying along with the coaches. That means the core of Fielder, Hanbin, Fearless, Doha, Sparkle, Aid, and of course Rush are all sticking around. It looks to me like Dallas have a nice, reliable core heading into the future, and it only has the chance to get even better as they pick up free agents, and according to them, they're looking for a lot of young players right now. Out of all teams, Dallas probably have the current most clear-cut direction aside from Shanghai, who we'll talk about a bit later. They're in tip-top shape, and I think that Dallas fans should be feeling excited. After years of pain and suffering, an exciting and sustainable future finally seems to be in your sights. Congrats. But Dallas weren't the only team making some good news happen. The Paris Eternal did the same thing. Their core of Don, Naga, Dridro, and Khan are back for another exciting year. Paris have officially committed long-term to a European roster, and honestly, good for them. That's great. The guys they held on to all showed flashes of brilliance last year. It's an exciting young core with room to only get better from here. But guess what? Some more good news comes the way of Paris as well, as Jmac has officially been promoted to the next head coach. Jmac has been killing it as a coach ever since he made the transition. This promotion is definitely deserved. According to Avala, Jmac was the strategic brain behind the Paris Eternal in 2021, and if that's the case, this was absolutely the right decision, and I'm super happy they went with him. I'm very pumped to see how he does now that he's fully controlling a team at the Tier 1 level. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the good news because now we're back to incoming free agents. For what feels like the third year in a row, EQO has entered free agency. Will this finally be the end of his Fusion era, or will he randomly get signed back at like the last moment again? At this moment in time, to me it feels like a 50-50. But if we're being honest, it's probably in the best interest of Philly to move on from him. Listen, it's been 4 years. If Philly can't win a championship with longtime veterans like EQO after all this time, it's probably never going to happen. I for one thought EQO was decent this year. Nothing incredible, but also not as bad as some people are making him out to be. I just think you have to move on at some point. If the Fusion are interested in winning a championship, they have to make notable changes and make upgrades. Don't let personal feelings and loyalty to your players get in the way too much. I know that Philly want to be the nice guys, but some fans are starting to get restless. You're heading into a new era of Overwatch here, and you really can't afford to mess it up. If EQO's time on Philly is up, though, there might be a few more teams who show interest in him. It's going to be tough, but I think there is a chance. He's a reasonably decent flex DPS who provides good veteran leadership, so I could totally see him providing guidance for like a rebuilding team such as Florida or Vancouver. Or maybe we go a step further and it goes to like the Paris Eternal, let's say. EQO and Poco going to Paris together might not be super far-fetched. Along with EQO, Shockwave has also entered free agency, although his departure from Philly has already been confirmed, unlike EQO. Although he played very little due to visa issues, Shockwave still looked pretty good. He still seemed sharp and like a worthwhile piece to possibly pursue. Kind of like with his former teammates, I know I'm starting to sound repetitive here, but I could kind of see Shockwave going towards the Paris Eternal. That seems like a decent move. His ceiling is arguably a bit higher than that of Onigot after all. Or maybe he could join a rebuilding team like the Mayhem. Heck, even the Houston Outlaws could be on the table if they need another DPS. Wherever he goes, I just pray that he gets to play for more than a month's worth of time. To finish up your Philly news for the day, Tobi is off the roster, and he's going to be retiring as a player to pursue a coaching career moving forward. First off, Tobi did his job, and he did it well. He was basically an unplanned emergency pickup, but he pretty much never missed a beat, while being the starter, that is. He came into a new system with very little preparation, and he killed it. Tobi deserves a round of applause. That's not the only reason he deserves praise, though, because he also had one heck of a career as a player. Not many players are as accomplished as he is, not to mention that you're not going to find many people with his level of longevity. We're talking 5 years of being a pro. That's a long time. And what I find cool about Tobi is he really stepped up his game the last couple of years in particular towards the back half of his career. After the back-to-back Apex titles, his level of play I feel declined a little, but by the time he entered his final year with Seoul, he was back in top form, if not even better. Tobi has quite the large following. Seoul and Lunatic High fans love this guy to death, so I think it's a very sad day to watch him leave his player legacy behind. He was one of the few remaining members of that Lunatic High dynasty. All that remains of it now is Who Are You, I believe. Tobi's commitment to the game and his list of achievements is so admirable. 2 Apex titles, 1 World Cup gold medal, and an Overwatch League Grand Finals appearance. Impressive stuff. Tobi can feel proud knowing he's leaving behind a fantastic career. All that's missing really as a player is that Grand Finals trophy. This guy is a class act. He played with a lot of emotion and passion out there. Tobi is a legend and a Hall of Fame level player who we can hopefully get to see again one day as a coach. Good luck, Tobi. Please come back to us one day. It wouldn't be the same without you. Staying on the fusion train of veterans retiring, Rascal is also calling it quits as a player. Given that Philly barely wanted to utilize him after EQO's return, it's not a horrible loss that's going to leave Philly fans crying. If this was the same Rascal from a couple of years ago, then maybe. But he was kind of just riding the end of his career at this point. He nearly hung it up last year anyway, so this result is not particularly surprising. What did come as a surprise, though, is that Rascal is not completely done with Overwatch. His time as a player might be over, but he wants to give coaching a try, just like Tobi. Rascal seems like a genuine guy who is good at forming connections. I could totally see him thriving in this type of role, and I'm excited to see what he can do. For now, though, I think it's important that we pay homage to Rascal's incredible career. It's very fitting that both him and Rascal decided to call it quits at the same time, given their history. They were legends of the Overwatch 1 era, but now that it's over, they no longer feel like it's their time to shine and they don't belong. For Rascal in particular, it kind of goes without saying that he had a fantastic career. There were times where he'd spent a fair amount of time on the bench, and other moments saw him having to overcome adversity and drama, like in the Dallas days, for example. But through it all, Rascal persevered, and he found ridiculous success at the Overwatch League level. In terms of accolades, he boasts 4 regular season tournament first place finishes if you include Stage 1 on London, 2 Grand Finals championships on top of that, and a top 2 finish in Apex with one of the longest careers in the game's history. Rascal has done it all, and his success is well deserved. Obviously, he was a superstar caliber flex DPS at his peak. His main forte is of course being a mega flex. It can be argued that he is one of the most, if not the #1 most flexible player in the game's history. If there was something his team needed him to play throughout the years, he would do it and most of the time would dominate the opposition. This guy played so many different heroes at the highest level. Generally thinking about some of the characters he played throughout the years, there's Mei, Genji, Pharah, Junkrat, McCree, Reaper, Tracer, Soldier 76, and many others. What makes Rascal so special, though, at least in my opinion, is how he could play and, kind of just adapt to any role that came his way. The way he played during the GOAT era was a sight to behold. He managed to be a top Brigitte and the best Baptiste at the time. He could literally pick up any hero in the game that he wanted to and instantly be good at them. That flexibility factor is definitely the thing I will always remember the most about Rascal's playing career. It was kind of next level in a way. With how hard this guy was working, I'm happy to know that he can retire with championships and other accolades. It's well deserved. But enough about the past. Rascal isn't going anywhere, at least not yet. So let's continue to cheer him on as he tries on the next thing in his career. Let's add on to the Philly free agents list with Hotba now. He too hasn't officially left, but you never know what deals might end up coming his way. It's pretty incredible how many times this guy has been a free agent in his career. Not once has he remained on the same team for more than a single season. He's almost a mercenary of some sort. Bear in mind, he's been around since the inaugural season as well. Maybe some teams don't value what he brings long term. Is Hotba nothing more than a temporary solution? That's what it feels like. The good news on Hotba's end, though, is he's had an up year compared to what he showed us on the NYXL. It wasn't like a Season 2 campaign on the Charge or anything where he was dominant, but he was relatively decent. He was less of a detriment to his team. The upscale in general performance could be just what he needs to secure a new contract, whether that would be on Philly or somewhere else. Even if he's not the greatest option out there, Hotba continuously draws interest from teams around the league as a veteran presence. So maybe, just maybe, he finds a way to sneak back in for yet another year. There's no guarantee, but that's kind of my current thought process. There's definitely a chance. Yet another thing going on with Philly is assistant coach Christfer pursuing free agency. After 3 years of being a part of the Philly family, it's time for him to move on. According to the rumors, he's likely to pursue a new head coaching gig, and if that's the case, good for him. That's awesome. He's been working really hard. Honestly though, I think this might be a good thing on the side of Philly too. You have to think about both of their assistant coaches, Christfer and Moby Dick, who both left the team. They were around before 9K joined the squad this year. Usually, a new head coach is going to want to have guys he 100% trust alongside him. That's a pretty common thing for just about any sport. With new head coaches, usually comes a lot of new staff members that he or she wants to work with. Right now, it's just KDG. This is a fantastic opportunity for him to build up that staff from the ground up in his own image. Coaching changes could be just the thing that Philly needs to get back on the right track. I have high hopes that this kind of decision will end up paying off. To follow up with the free agency trend, a familiar face is ready to get back in action. That's right, Striker is coming out of retirement and is officially looking for a team. The Tracer King is back. With his level of star power, I have zero doubt in my mind he's back for Season 5. The only question is, where does he go? What team makes for a logical destination, if you will? Well, the Shock immediately come to mind. It's what he's familiar with, and he will surely be happy there. Thinking about some other options, you probably can't rule out Toronto, Philly, Atlanta, Guangzhou, and a few of the other Eastern teams. In particular, though, I think him going to the Reign would be sick. A real Tracer specialist alongside Pelican sounds deadly. It's only a matter of time until we hear an announcement, I guarantee you. I would be shocked if Striker does not find a team by the start of Season 5. Now for some older stuff. On Saturday, we saw a lot of teams take action. The major one in most people's eyes is probably the Gladiators parting ways with Muze. I'm not gonna lie, this was not a move I expected. I admit that Muze was not incredible, at least at the start of this year, but as the months rolled on and the Glads got better, he showed insane levels of improvement. I would consider Muze to be a reliable tank player currently, and he still has the potential to grow even further. It's very interesting that the Gladiators would make this decision, and I for one think it means one of two things. Either this team wants to further commit to Space as their main guy and have him pick up some of the main tank heroes that Muze played, or they found a noteworthy upgrade compared to Muze. Some of the common replacement theories I have heard have revolved around Smurf. Regardless of who they roll with, I really do think a notable upgrade is on the way. I doubt they'd put all of their eggs into the Space basket, although I wouldn't really be surprised if they get him to pick up some of the other heroes and be their primary starter. The Gladiators are known for making power moves though, so a new and more noteworthy tank player very much could be on his way. If the Glads upgrade this position, they might become a true contender. In other Gladiator news, the team parted ways with Mirror as he tests the waters of free agency this year. This one is not nearly as shocking as the Muze thing. Mirror's been here for 2 years now and has always kind of just been a secondary option. He was definitely the most replaceable member of this roster in my opinion, and surely they can find a stronger option with a higher ceiling perhaps. The good news for Mir is this is a good time for him and his skill set to go into free agency. The league is going to be played on a new game, a game where teams are likely to value flexibility more than ever before, and that's kind of what Mir's trademark is, you know? He's the ultimate flex. Aside from various projectile characters, he can flex onto support and onto tank if needed. Another team might gravitate towards these kinds of qualities. While I'm not sure how many teams will be interested, I'm willing to guarantee at least a couple give him a tryout just because of that flexibility factor. Anyway, finishing up your Glads news for the day is assistant coach Tydolla leaving the team. Based off some of their results this year, as well as how some of their players progressed a lot over time, I would assume that the Gladiators had finally turned a new leaf at coaching because of somebody like Tydolla. You have to assume that Tydolla is at least partially responsible for the Glad success, and because he is a coach and not a player, this departure might go under the radar. And guess what? Tydolla immediately got a new job, which goes to show how valuable he is. The rumors were true. Tydolla has decided to join the Washington Justice in hopes that he can help turn this team around. That's the exact kind of upgrade the Justice were looking for, I feel. Some player development will do them good. Anyway, next up we have the Chengdu Hunters, who officially said their goodbyes to the Yada Chad himself, Ameng. On the surface, something like this was widely expected. Gaga was their guy during Season 4, and it's obvious to figure out why, because his hero pool is vastly superior and his Wrecking Ball is literally just as good, if not better. Ameng has kind of run his course with Chengdu, but even so, it's still a really sad moment because Ameng means so much to the Chengdu Hunters franchise. When you think Chengdu, Ameng is like the first guy to come to mind. What he did for this franchise is simply unforgettable. He is a big factor that put Chengdu on the map. Him playing Wrecking Ball during the GOATS era gave fans such a refreshing experience, and while everybody was always playing Ryan and the standard GOATS heroes, Ameng was just popping off on ball. It was great. It kind of goes without saying, at least up until recent memory, that he's been their most iconic player. Scratch that. He's one of the most iconic players in League history, even. Everybody loves Ameng. Literally in the span of a few weeks, he earned the nickname Yada Chad. If you only started watching the league recently, please do yourself a favor and watch a few Chengdu games from Season 2 in particular. You will very quickly discover why he means so much to this community. For a long time, this dude was technically playing an unoptimal hero, but him and the Hunters always made it work. But what's so funny is he could honestly play whatever he wanted to. The iconic matchup that you definitely should watch against the Vancouver Titans says it all. The supposed Wrecking Ball one-trick put Bumper, one of the best Ryan players, one of the most aggressive Ryan players, in his place. It's probably one of the most iconic games in League history, at least from the GOATS era. Just an absolute classic. Ameng holds a special place in many people's hearts. He generated tons of fans for life, basically, both for him and Chengdu. And all of this iconic history in the making was possible because Chengdu decided to give him a chance. Luckily for us, it might not be time to say goodbye just yet. Ameng did announce he is looking for a new team, and he did so in probably one of the most confident ways I have ever seen. If your team is going to win the championship, then I am going to be the final piece of the puzzle. What a Chad. But this begs the question, is he going to get picked up? I'm not sure. He says that he has grown and he feels comfortable on all main tanks, but I'm not sure about that. He's going to have to prove himself for me to truly believe it, because based on what we've seen in the past, he's only really above average on Wrecking Ball. I think in theory he could go to another Chinese team at the very least. I think depending on how the Spark and Charge approach their offseason, they both might end up looking for a backup player like him. Not necessarily a starter like he'd want to be, but I think a backup is definitely something that could happen. Good luck to Ameng. I really do hope he makes it back. I want to see him prove himself in that confident way that he was proclaiming in his Twitter post, but also I know how much he means to this community, so I would hate to see him go so soon. Keeping on the subject of Chengdu, Lateyoung and the team parted ways after a 3-year partnership. It really didn't feel that long given how much Lateyoung was on the bench throughout the years, but I think we can all agree that he ended his career on Chengdu on great terms. After Elsa retired mid-year, he came in and truly stepped up his game. It was probably the best I've ever seen him look as a pro. And what's great about it all is he did more than just play Zarya. I kind of feel like that was his reputation throughout the years, being this Zarya one-trick if you will. But this year was different because he killed it on the Diva. I was genuinely impressed. It's not like he was just okay. I mean it when I say that he looked pretty good out there. Now, of course, Chengdu could probably do better through free agency, but credit still goes where it's due. Since there's only a handful of other teams who even have the slightest interest in Chinese talent, I'm not expecting Lateyoung to find a new job job at this level if he decides not to retire. It's not meant to disrespect him or anything, that's kind of just the current state of the league. That's enough about the Hunters for one video. On to the Washington Justice. They decided to start off their offseason by parting ways with closer, TTuba, and assistant coach Hawkery. Given the disappointing results from this year, some changes were absolutely in order. You guys kind of already know my feelings on the closer thing in particular. The Justice can do a lot better, I feel. Closer played a bit too passively for my liking and was only truly effective on Lucio. The Justice straight up gave him a chance, but he didn't really play up to their vision and how he played during the tryouts, I guess you could say. Time for a nice upgrade. No more closer, preferably someone more aggressive. As for what's to come next for Closer himself, he is stepping away from Overwatch to complete his mandatory military service back in Korea. Despite the criticisms and shortcomings, Closer has been around for quite some time. He's been a pro for the better part of 5 years, and he's been a part of multiple championship rosters, and that's something I can respect. So while he's leaving on a rather sour note, I think over the last couple of years, we can still look back at his career and say that he was technically well accomplished. On the other hand, TTuba will be entering free agency as he looks to maybe get another shot. Given how Washington pretty much only used him as a Brigitte specialist this year, I think that this loss doesn't come as much of a shock. They clearly felt more invested in other options, like Assassin, let's say. TTuba showcased really good potential in the second half of Season 3, but I guess it just wasn't meant to be. It's hard to say if he's a shoo-in as well to get signed to another team, unfortunately. He's basically in the same boat as Mir, where he's been around for a while, and teams might feel more inclined to go after a rookie talent of some sort. After how well he played in the second half of Season 3, I want to see him get another shot. He was carrying the Justice for a while before Decay came along, but there's no guarantee given recent events. And now that gets me into Hawkery, the final person to leave the Justice so far. As the player development coach, he didn't do a great job. Like I said, a lot of these same individual issues remain persistent throughout the entire year with the Justice. Coaching changes are just as important as roster additions here. The Justice have to make some big-time moves. They seriously cannot afford to waste a roster with this much of a high ceiling, and I think they're already off to a good start by getting Tydolla, who clearly is a bit better at his job. But the Washington Justice have some other news. He's not officially off the team as he stated in his tweet, but Bebe is a free agent too. Not to sound toxic, but I for one believe the Justice should look to move on. This guy had a lot of chances to progress and prove himself throughout the years, but he never did. 3 years of little to no real improvement is enough. Don't waste your time on another year of him, Washington. Settling for mediocrity seems like a waste of potential and your time. Why not improve upon your consistency with a more aggressive playmaker, someone that's more skilled? Somebody like Twilight, in my opinion, fits the bill perfectly. As for Bebe himself, I don't have high expectations. He will be nowhere near the most sought-after flex support in the market. He likely won't even crack the top 5 if we're being honest with ourselves. This dude is going to have to work his butt off to get another chance because what he showed on Washington simply will not cut it if he's leaving the team, that is. It's pretty disappointing to think this way because Bebe has good potential, but that's kind of where we stand currently. That's all I've got for the Justice, and up next now is the Houston Outlaws. I mentioned how the likes of Joobi and JJangu were free to explore options in the previous video, but since then, Houston has officially parted ways with both of them, so they will not be returning to Houston no matter what. If you want to know what I think of their departures, check out the previous episode. A link to the playlist can be found at the end of this video. But now another guy joins the LFT club. Dreamer could be on his way out as well. As of this recording, the Outlaws have not made an official goodbye post like with Crimzo, but Dreamer himself put former Outlaws player in his bio, so it's up to you on what you think of this current situation. As a former Valiant fan, I'm definitely biased when saying this, but I for one believe the Outlaws should try and bring him back if there's no other enticing option out there on the market. He can play most main tank heroes fairly well. If it's not meant to be with Houston, hopefully somebody else gives him a shot. Dreamer could be a good addition on just about any team with some empty tank slots looking to start over. Right now, there aren't that many options, but I suspect that could change as the weeks keep on rolling by. Thinking about what this means for Houston in general, I'm a little disappointed because they literally just got over having a disaster tank situation back in Season 3. It would be very unfortunate if they fall back into that hole once again. I hope for the sake of all Outlaws fans out there that they have some sort of plan. Maybe they have their sights set on like Muze, let's say. I think a young core of Muze and Piggy could be really nice. Tank is one of 2 big positions alongside support the Outlaws simply must address during the offseason. Keep a close eye on them. Heading into San Francisco Shock territory, they have a few things going on right now. First off, Smurf joined the same club as Twilight. He is going to be exploring all of his options in free agency, but technically has not ruled out a return to the Shock just yet. A player of Smurf's caliber is going to draw a ton of interest. That kind of goes without saying. Think about the options available to him. If he's not coming back to San Francisco, I can think of 4 other teams at the minimum that could be good landing spots. Maybe he signs with Houston or the Gladiators. Perhaps he joins Philly. Maybe even Seoul if they get rid of some of their tanks. And that's just to name a few examples. Smurf could be a huge pickup for a lot of teams looking to take another step forward, and I'm hyped to see what happens. Thinking about this from the Shock's point of view, they're kind of in a dangerous spot. If they lose Smurf, that's a pretty large blow. He's a top-notch Winston and Orisa player who has brought ridiculous consistency to this team for the better part of 3 years. And who knows what might happen with Super. I'm still of the belief that he might end up retiring. I have no evidence to back up this claim, but that's my general feeling at the moment. The Shock could be dealing with almost a brand new tank rotation. There's a few different options out there if you're the Shock as it currently stands, but replicating Smurf's level of production is a challenge even for some of the most elite tank players. It's weird to think that Smurf could be on a different team, but that's kind of the reality we might be facing as the list of former Shock players could continue to grow. A third Shock player that could be looking elsewhere this offseason is Glister. I, for one, think that he was a little disappointing this year. I thought for sure he'd be a disgusting superstar-level player under a great system such as this one. Now, in his defense, he was still a pretty reliable player, but I thought he'd just do more just because of what we saw in London and the fact that he was going to a team of the Shock's caliber. After how hard he carried on London, I kind of assumed the same would apply to the Shock. He'd be a god of some sort. But as it turns out, not everybody can be absurdly dominant all the time under the Shock, especially when the team as a whole goes through their own personal struggles and synergy issues, and I guess confidence issues in a way, given how many times they lost in tournaments. With Ants coming out of retirement, I'm not entirely sure if the Shock need him anymore. They could probably let Glister walk if they're willing to, if it's really not a big deal to them, because they could try and fill out a spot with less coverage, and they can save some money even. What could be a minimal loss for San Fran could be a giant gain for others. Glister didn't perform up to a superstar level this year, but it's not like the dude can't play. Based off his time on London and Gen G, we know for a fact that this guy has a pretty high ceiling given his skills. A fresh start might be exactly what Glister needs to get back on the right track. Maybe he goes to the Dallas Fuel or Boston Uprising, let's say. Surely somebody out there is willing to give him a shot because there is so much potential there. But where he ends up going is totally a mystery, and I leave the theories up to you. Keeping on the Shock news, we have Byzenith, one of their assistant coaches that they picked up mid-season, also entering free agency. Given how well the Shock played during the playoffs and that lower bracket they went on and everything, I would argue there's a chance that some other teams might have some interest in him. But overall, I'm not really sure what to expect because, again, he was a mid-season pickup. If the Shock like him, that must mean he's good. But you never know. While we're on the topic of Shock coaches, I'm curious what's going to happen with the other guys. From what I can tell on social media, Krusty made it seem like he's staying for another year, but anything could happen at any given time. And what about Kasaurus, their assistant coach? He's highly respected. Maybe he's going to pursue a head coaching position. Maybe he doesn't want to stay with the Shock anymore. There's so many different possibilities, and all of it kind of scares me. Genuinely, there is a big threat in the air that a lot of key contributors from the past year are going to leave. You got Twilight, Smurf, Byzenith could be on his way out, like we were just talking about. Who knows? I mean, even Nero, he kind of hinted that he doesn't want to play Overwatch anymore and that Overwatch 2 isn't really up his alley. You don't have to hit the panic button just yet, but if you're a Shock fan, you might want to brace for impact because some big changes could be on the horizon yet again. On the idea of like grand finals level teams, let's talk about the Atlanta Reign because Masaa is set to enter free agency. The Reign didn't make an official post yet, so Masaa technically could return. The man had a pretty good year, I would say. In my opinion, he showed great improvement compared to Season 3. He worked hard at getting better on that Brigitte of his. It's gotten to the point where he's once again a great all-around, reliable support option. Given how good of an ult tracker and communicator he is, along with making the grand finals and the improvements I was talking about, I would say a payday is probably in his future. A grand finalist with so much going for him is going to draw eyes. So honestly, he might just go where the money is at the end of the day. He's got a good thing going for himself in Atlanta, but it's a business. He's got to think about his well-being, his career, his future. Masaa might find a new home in like Houston, let's say. They're looking for a new main support. If Funny Astro leaves Philly, that's another solid option that presents itself. After his 2021 performance, Masaa finding a home is likely a given. The Reign's intentions aren't as clear though. I'd assume Masaa is still of interest to them, but you never really know. Maybe they don't want him anymore. And if they don't, I still fall back on my Funny Astro theory from last week. I'm pumped to see where this team goes and how they could get to the next level. That's all I've got for you currently when it comes to the Reign and Masaa, so let's talk about the 2021 champion Shanghai Dragons, who I have 3 things to talk about with. First off, Develop is gone. If we're being honest, he was mostly only there to be a backup anyway. Lip and Fleta were always going to start in any sort of important game, and that trend will likely continue. So it's time for Develop to move on to something else. He seems like a player with decent potential if Shanghai was interested in him. A team seeking a rebuild or to form a budget roster of some sort may be inclined to give him a contract. Thing number 2 on the agenda is that the Dragons were kind enough to give us the contract status of all of their remaining players on the roster. As you can see, they appear to be bringing back every single player. Fate, Izayaki, and Lip are already under contract, so expect all of them to be out there for 2022 no matter what. As for the rest of the guys, usually a team option would mean the Dragons are still mulling over if they want to bring them back or not, but according to their Twitter post, they've already brought back every single one of their players and they said to expect all of them to be on the roster. The only way that's going to change according to them is if something sudden happens, such as a retirement or a trade. So if you were scared as a Shanghai fan this offseason, you probably shouldn't be. Everything looks good right now from a player standpoint at least. Can we also just take a sec to appreciate Shanghai for doing this? Florida did a similar thing last year, and I for one think it's great. It's full transparency with the fans, and on top of that, you keep your fans from getting anxious over the off-season festivities. Being in the loop makes you feel a lot better. Really cool of Shanghai to do something like this, and I'm hoping other teams do the same in the near future. What's maybe a bit more concerning is the third bit of news. Assistant coaches Dongsu and J-Feel have parted ways with the team. The 2 of them have been here since Shanghai came into dominance back in 2020, so you'd have to imagine they at least played a partial role in keeping the players in tip-top shape and designing good game plans. It might not have been all up to Shanghai on why these 2 are gone though. Both of them are LFT and right now are looking to become head coaches elsewhere. I wouldn't be shocked if either one of them or both of them landed this kind of job. The championship level teams tend to have interest drawn towards their assistant coaches in sports, like it's just a general thing, and the Overwatch League is no exception. Multiple former Shock coaches have already done this, and we've seen it happen with London coaches as well. This is how it goes. As championship coaches, these 2 will certainly get new opportunities. The one bit of good news for the Dragons with all of this at least is they technically still have 2 assistants left on the team anyway, because as of right now they have Kong and Damon. Coach Moon is also very capable, so in all likelihood I think that the 3 of them will work out just fine. And lastly, while it's kind of old news, I thought I'd bring it up anyway because not everybody's seen the video. In case you didn't watch it, the Florida Mayhem announced the departure of BQB, Checkmate, OG, Gargoyle, Gangnam Jin, and Slime, and Yaki is likely to be traded according to the current reports and rumors. All of this further points to the idea of the Mayhem going fully Western, just as the rumors have mentioned. It's a really sad moment for the Mayhem and their fan base, I would say. The core of Yaki, BQB, Gangnam Jin, and Gargoyle have helped this franchise find the only real success they have ever seen, but recent results and wanting a fresh start in Overwatch 2 have warranted this decision in the eyes of Mayhem management. Whether it's justified or not is totally up to you to decide. But now, we all kind of just have to sit back with excitement as we see where some of these talented Florida players go next. If you want my full breakdown of the Florida situation, check out my breaking news video. A link will be provided in the description. Well, boys and girls, that's gonna do it. I know this was a long one, but so much happened in the span of like less than a week. It's insane. That is every offseason move that has gone down from October 2nd up until now. The official start of free agency is literally just around the corner. We're like a day away, less than a day, less than 24 hours, so buckle in. The wild ride has only just begun when you think about it. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, hitting like and subscribe would really make my day, and it helps out the channel so much. And feel free to leave your thoughts about the recent news in the comments below and what you're looking forward to in free agency. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.